Hello, everybody, and welcome to ReAligned Healthcare. We have Peter Durlach with us today, Chief Strategy Officer of the Microsoft Healthcare Life Sciences. Peter, welcome to the episode.
Yauheni, thank you very much. Appreciate having me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
Peter, you work across innovation, operation, now platform enablement. What do you think and what excites you about the AI in the healthcare today? Where do you see the most of the concerns?
Yeah, I think you know, as you've been in the space for a long time, Yauheni, I think what's exciting is the acceleration of the impact that the technology can bring, whether it's to providers, patients, or on the care delivery side, the organizations themselves, and obviously even beyond providers into life sciences and the health plan world. Although the technology is still early in many areas, the impact that we're seeing is really taking off. There's obviously more work to do to really drive this at scale across all these use cases, but the exciting part for me is just the level of real world impact that we're seeing again in whether it's in again for efficiency's sake, revenue protection or generation, patient experience, or things even on the life sciences side around drug discovery or clinical trials.
You're talking about use cases and savings. When you talk with the industry, there is a lot of pilots going on. There's a lot of activities and trying. Some of them are moving into production, some of none of them. But many organizations struggling to move past the pilot phase with a lot of the AI. From your perspective, what it does actually take to move from experimentation to the real operational margins?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges here is AI is a platform, it's a tool. So there are many different use cases that can be deployed. So I think you have to separate repeatable productized versions versus one-off developments that a customer might do or try. And so you're seeing a distribution like all new technology of use cases where you're very familiar, like in the ambient scribe, ambient listening space, many hundreds of organizations have moved way past pilots. We have over 600 clients. Our competitors have a couple hundred combined. So there's probably almost 1,000 organizations that have deployed at scale, at reasonable amounts of scale, depending on the site, over the last 12 or 18 months. And then at the other spectrum, you have some sites that are hand building applications that aren't really fully productized. And so they're sort of still in the pilot phase of it. So it's hard to answer it in one way across the whole spectrum. What we've seen again is the maturity of the use cases affect, getting to scale. Two is what problems are they solving and how much of a burning platform are they? The more critical they are, they tend to go faster. And three is, as you know, is the organization ready to deploy them at scale? And is there a mechanism to do that? Again, there's certain applications that are fully integrated and you can just roll them out like a commercial software product. There are others where they're sort of one-off developments where you may have the AI application, but the full thought of how you get them into clinical workflow and deployed is still very immature. And those things often hit a wall at the pilot stage because even if this software is doing what it's supposed to do in a very constrained environment, that's very different than rolling it out at scale. So there's a lot of different permutations of addressing this based on where the use case is and how mature it is and the organization that's deploying.
Peter, thank you. That makes sense. But also, we're talking about a different type of the archetype of the companies we're dealing with, because some of the AMC may have capacity to build and experiment, and some of the centers just frankly following the vendor. And I think a lot of the success we got with the ambient intelligence lately is because it's a relatively simple to communicate use case. As a clinician, you go there, you talk, and you get your magic notes appears in the EHR system. But at the same time, we see a lot of the activities from the vendor that's also pushing the deployments. Pretty much in 5 years, we went from very small pilots of a big AMC into almost every hospital now have one or two ambient documentation. When you go on the smaller things, especially with the platform, is more challenging because it's frankly not even technology. Very often it's also the problem you're trying to solve. And historically, our centers may not be very well and versed and knowledgeable into exact small automation steps that can be done to solve the problem. Which bring us to some degree of a conundrum, right? Like as a company that's maybe somewhere in the mid-level, as a healthcare system that wants to be a leader for the patients and for the quality, but at the same time you have meaningful, small expertise so far. Do you invest in building more of a technical expertise and trying to build things yourself? Do you invest more in learning and how to properly productize and describe your problem and then work with the vendors? Or frankly, you just wait until some of the
Yeah.
problems you have been solved by one of the vendors or HR.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think the answer depends a lot on the organization, Yauheni, as you know. I don't think there's one answer that fits it. There are some sites that probably will never build their own applications, and they're going to look for vendor solutions and follow, I would say, the normal procurement process that they have. They may still have issues around, do they have the team in place to roll it out properly and things like that. Once you get to the more sophisticated sites that have more resources, effectively, I think it's going to be some hybrid. I will say though that regardless of the on either end of the spectrum, I think we would argue that trying to invest in much as a platform as you can is important. I know you and I have talked about this before, and there's no such thing as just one platform. Some people will look at companies like us, look at companies like the EHR vendors, et cetera. But I think minimizing the number of infrastructures that you use is important because no one has the scale to handle all these point solutions, and it's just overwhelming right now. So I think when you're trying to purchase solutions, again, whether that's for documentation, rev cycle, patient access, or whatever, really doing your homework on what platforms are available in terms of your infrastructure to deploy. And that goes all the way from the cloud infrastructure all the way up to the application layer. And if you're building stuff, that's also 100% also true, which is if you're an AMC and you want to unleash your researchers and others to build applications, you want a platform that they can reuse components. And we're seeing that take off at scale now. I mean, we obviously have competitors in our space, but in the world that we live in, a lot of folks are standardized on the Azure AI infrastructure. They'll often put their own version of a large language model based on our infrastructure with PHI protection in place that lets people sort of experiment, and then they'll use a set of tooling to start building the applications for the use cases. So that's not going to get rid of all of the edge cases, but I think that's the way you sort of try to manage as best you can. And then you still have the challenge internally is how do you decide which ones to allow people to build, or is it a free for all? And once you build stuff, how do you decide where to put the effort in to deploy it? So you have to have some governance model for measuring the potential impact and maturity of the application to decide, when and if to deploy and to whom. And I think that is often not looked at. That's not sort of as evolved as it might be in some places. Other places have a very sophisticated model for doing that. But that's where we've seen the biggest impact. So you'll have a distribution of use cases across the maturity curve, sort of like managing a portfolio. And you'll decide, okay, I'm going to focus on these small set that have the problem statement that I really want to go after, that are not so complicated to deploy that the chasm between the prototype and deployment is so big that you think the odds are too high that they're going to go off the cliff between prototyping and deployment at scale.
And it makes sense because building an MVP and deploying MVP is a completely different beast, especially supporting it in a long-term in production and scale. One interesting thing, because there is a lot of a discussion about the platform, and it's certainly been talk of a town for a while. How do we even define the platform? Because very often we get stuck into platform definition and very, I would say, business friendly way, aka it means exactly what I want it to mean in that particular point.
Yeah.
Um, and also the platform very often uses a boogeyman of we cannot do your open source technology for X, right? We cannot deploy it here because, oh, here's a platform of doing it, even though it's not apple to apple or may not even be doing the same, is just being in a similar domain, right? Like no one is truly doing a homework. So Based on what you're seeing, what's a good way to actually define what is the platform and what level of a platform definition is
Yeah,
helpful for healthcare systems?
it's a great question, and I don't think there's necessarily only one way to look at this. The way I think about it is the following, which is, and again, it's somewhat dependent on the type of organization you have. So I'm going to use as this example, AMC, or more sophisticated site that has more resources to both build and buy, because I think it'll flush out the question in more detail. In that case, I think there are a couple of foundational platforms that most customers, you know this, that most customers have. One is, what's my cloud and AI infrastructure for deploying not only applications of that company but third party. So I have at least one common infrastructure for cloud and AI tooling. Okay, so that's one platform decision. The second one I would argue is everybody who has an EHR, which of course pretty much everybody in the provider, they look at the EHR as a platform because by definition, at least on the clinical side and often in other parts of the workflow, that's where or other personas, that's where the workflow is. So if I'm always inside the EHR doing most of my work, that's a natural platform to surface a lot of these things. And by the way, these aren't mutually exclusive, as you know. So to me, those are sort of the two foundational platform questions that a provider, I'll focus on providers for the point of this conversation, have to make a decision about. So they've already probably made their EHR decision, likely. Many of them have made their cloud decision, but not all. And some have pockets of this. And this isn't just where do I put my infrastructure in, it's what is the AI infrastructure on top of the sort of, core hosting environment or VMs in the cloud or infrastructure that are important for me to leverage in cases where I'm going to build my own applications, or in many cases, there are also commercial benefits to having your cloud vendor and commercial vendors all run on the same cloud, although it's a hybrid environment. So those to me are the two big decisions that people need to make, and that's where you get your leverage in a lot of these cases. Then when you look at the application level, some of the applications you'll get from those two platform vendors I just mentioned. One could be Microsoft, one could be the HR vendor, or pick your favorite vendor in that space. But then on the application level, there are lots of key application, whether that's in the rev cycle, patient engagement, et cetera, et cetera. So once you get up to the app layer, the questions you have that I see is, one is, at the app layer, what level of use cases does that application vendor support? Because again, you don't want to die by 1,000 cuts of having one-offs everywhere. So there's a lot of platform expansion at the application layer that's happening. So that's sort of the third element. And the other piece that connects to that is what cloud do those app layer run on, and how well they integrated to your other platform, the EHR. So these things sort of form, in a way, a triangle of sorts, which is, you've got to think about, the way I think about this is, what are the burning use cases that I need to solve? Like, start with the problem you're trying to solve, problems to solve. Who are the big platform vendors I've already invested in? And who's going to get me to try to drive value against those things? Because as you know, in the provider universe today, the docs are overwhelmed, the nurses are overwhelmed, everybody financially is struggling. There's so much pressure now with a lot of the government cuts to funding, et cetera, especially in the academic insight. You just don't have the resources and time to get too, diffuse in what you're going to do. So that's sort of my my definition of, at least the foundational platforms that you have. You might have something else in, managing genomics data sets and real world evidence. So that's not meant to be completely exhaustive, but sort of at the foundational layer. That's my view on it.
So find your great infrastructure partner, ensure that you are clear about your application layers. And I think the key part is find your problems. Because if I have to say one major reason why all the platform initiative failed, is we build a platform, now we are totally out of imagination what to build on this platform. So the platform coming with a cost, and ROI is not there, right? Compared to smaller one-offs. So, which kind of bring us to the more of a value discussion. So tech without measurable impact, no one really cares. So what are the most common mistakes you see in organization seeing, trying to derive the value out of AI or
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Yeah, it's very much what you said. I also heard a talk by one of the large consulting firms recently, and they echoed this in their own way, which is when they go into a lot of providers and they end up coming out with n number of use cases spread across three, four, five, six domains, and so the client wants to go shallow and see what works, and in their experience, that is like a recipe for not getting a lot of success. Much for the same reason you did is what are your burning platforms, and then put more wood, the cliche, put more wood behind a smaller set of arrows.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's not just the development, it's the deployment, it's the workflow. Some of these require change management. It's not just you dump the thing off and magically everything works. So in a way, a lot of what we've learned over the years on how to deploy something successfully in healthcare on the provider is the same with AI. Start with the problem. Make sure that you have some technical feasibility. You think you can achieve that. Pick a couple areas. Go deep. Go deep. Figure out how it works. How does it work in the workflow? Are there changes in behavior? Are there organizational things that you have to change because the use cases span different organizational silos in the organization? And so it gets fuzzy who's accountable for what. Completely unrelated to the tech. Okay, like patient access center is a classic one. There's IT, there's patient access, there might be rev cycle folk, like everybody's a little different. So getting that aligned, that's where you're going to see the impact. I mean, clearly if you pick a problem that the tech can't solve, that's a problem. But in general, other than a certain, some of the more immature use cases, there's tech today with AI, rev cycle, patient access, documentation, other things that have been proven to work. They're not like they don't work. It's really around, are you putting enough wood behind it? Have you picked the right partner? And then you have a deployment model that can actually work at scale, I think.
And tech becoming progressively easier to use. Like I have to say, thing that's looked like magic maybe even 2 years ago now is a commonplace that you can write in few prompts. So it's mind-boggling. The speed of obsolescence of a technology is fast, which kind of brings me to the question we touched it a little bit, is if the speed is so fast, right? It's like if you did nothing for 6 months and now you're coming back, things improved, things got cheaper, right? Is it even worth it to risk
Yeah,
it and try and you should just wait for other people to solve it for you and you
yeah.
just follow the blueprints?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think again the answer is somewhat nuanced. So it rarely do you find leaders in an industry that sit back and wait for everybody else to figure stuff out. I would just say in terms of proving value. I mean, again, you're seeing that today, not to pick on the ambient thing, but it's a good example. You're seeing actual improvement in burnout rates, physician retainment, and recruitment in places that are more advanced, as one example. There are examples in RevCycle where you're seeing improvement in denial rates, prior auth completions, payment integrity of people that have gone early. That doesn't mean they're not bumps in the road. So I don't think sitting back and waiting as a general approach is a great idea, but the alternative isn't great either, which is just to go willy-nilly and try to do like lots of things, because again, it's going to go back to this issue of the platform and how you stack rank the use cases. So if it was me on the provider side, what I would do again is, and we do this internally at Microsoft in different contexts, is you create a sort of a 2x2 grid that's sort of y-axis potential impact, x-axis technical maturity risk, something along those lines. And you start plotting the problems to solve in the 2x2. Okay? That gives you a framework that says, okay, in my institution, these are I'm just making this up. These are the three big problems that we could solve. What's the tech maturity of that? What are the vendor solutions out there? How many proof points are there? Are there any? Or is it a homegrown thing I have to do because I have some very custom thing? I mean, most providers, the problem statements are pretty similar. I mean, there's a million edge cases, but the core problems, they're not 100 of them. There's 5 or 10 that are the dominant ones. If you sat the C-suite from any provider down, the odds of them veering off those 5 or 10, pretty low, in my experience. So You're going to stack rank those and then say, okay, what resource capacity do I have to attack those? And again, it might be different from buy versus build. And then again, go deep on those. I mean, again, we have lots of examples. Same product that we have or a partner has. You look at two organizations on how it was deployed and the scale of impact, you can see a super wide range. Why is that? It's not the tech. Tech's the same. It's all the other issues. Deployment, workflow integration, do they have is there a clear owner on the inside? So I think, again, it's a balancing act. There's no like sit back and wait 3 years or just assume that every use case you potentially can think of, you should go invest in. I don't think either of those are true statements.
You mentioned tech maturity in 2x2. And over the years working with the healthcare technology leaders, I realized that the knowledge arbitrage between what's true maybe in the industry versus what is like common knowledge right now around the industry, vary, maybe high and low. So some teams may say, oh, absolutely, that's a state of the art, AI models. And obviously every vendor telling they're the best of breed, best in class, etc. So if you lack internal expertise and you don't really work with a vendor, how do you even make this call? Because I think if we go back to your ambient example, if we go 5-6 years, we already had some ambient documentation, right? And back in the day, that was a state-of-the-art best solution. But people invested, it didn't really work that well as it's working now because we were running it on a different type of technology. But it was best in class. So how do you make a decision? Because I see a lot of the use cases now that are maybe overly complicated for the current agentic flows or maybe LLMs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to give you any super new insight that you probably don't already have. But I mean, in my experience, there are only really two things you can do. One is you have to do your homework on the applications, the references, and talk to your peers. You just have to. Doesn't mean, again, you can't just talk to two people. You have to talk to a variety because you have to sort of correlate between the data points that you can find out pretty fast whether something actually does work in some settings and delivers value. It's not that hard. If you're the first one or second one, you have to assume that there's going to be, some work to do on that front. The second thing is I do think the pilots are important because just because it works somewhere else doesn't necessarily it's going to work for you. I mean, this varies a lot. I mean, some of the more mature apps, it should work pretty much everywhere if your profile looks similar, unless there's some internal issue that can't be resolved. But if it's something that doesn't have a lot of references, or you have a very different care setting or patient mix, depending on what the use case is, you have to try it. And the thing that I find is most important in those pilots, you have to do two things. You have to have clear metrics for success. What are you actually measuring? And do you have buy-off by the important people? And what I mean by important people is who's going to pay for it and who's going to use it. If you don't have both of those, the pilot's just like, it's a fun thing to do. It might be fun to do, and it might be worth something, but you'll never scale. Well, I shouldn't say never. It will be a long term to get to scale if you don't have buy-in from those two people or groups. And that's what you have to do. So here's the metrics I'm going to move. You have buy-in that if I hit them, I'm going to, my whatever the user persona is, I'm committed to help championing that out because I see the value. And these are the metrics that I, as the user community, care about. And then the person paying the bill says, yep, if you can move those metrics, and here's what the return on investment is, I'm going to, obviously something can happen, but effectively they pre-committed to fund it if you hit the metrics. That to me is, if you don't have that in a pilot, then I question the value of the pilot. If you have that and you've got that bought in, that's where I see the thing go from pilot, assuming the pilot works and you hit the metrics, go from pilot to scale because they've thought through the metrics and the buy-in. And by definition, if you've done that, you've not only solved the financial thing, but the workflow has to be solved because you're never going to get the users to buy into it if it doesn't work in their workflow, by definition. So you sort of encapsulate the problem. And you may realize, by the way, that when you're going through trying to get buy-in, You may change where on the 2x2 that thing sits. You might say big problem, but after I dug into it, boy, the workflow thing is a nightmare, and every version is different, every specialty one. So the complexity goes through the roof, right? So that thing moves from like, on the right of the x-axis, from being easily to execute to not so easy. The impact's still potentially big, but the execution path is much harder. So I'm gonna score it lower in what I should focus on, maybe.
This is such a critical point from the all the innovation transformation team's perspective, because what I found, like looking across healthcare system, is great that we may have an innovation transformational budget or even IT budget from that perspective when the shops actually own it. But now you actually decoupling thing you talk about, because as a CDO, I'll come to my clinical team and say I have this amazing tool, I'm planning to deploy it, no cost for you, we're gonna do a pilot, and of course they're excited. They're getting a new fancy tool, and
Yep.
especially AMC, someone can publish in it, someone can learn about this. This is great, right? But you don't have the same level of engagement. And
No.
and now you also cannot go and ask for a budget because you already got a budget, right? And your budget to do all of this. So this is frankly innovation center setup problem, because very often you actually creating a system to fail because a lot of your engaged partners do not have a skin in the game beyond the pilot. They want to milk the pilot as much as they can, get the value, and they may not have a full desire to move or frankly to properly participate in your 2x2 environment design, right? Because they're like, okay, all the costs are going to the transformation or innovation team. You're getting an analyst, you're getting a training, and we're just gonna be there and give you feedback through the session. So I cannot understate how important it is to ensure you actually get the buy-in and frankly start pushing it on the budget where people have not only operational but the fiscal responsibility from a project as soon as
Yeah,
possible.
yeah. It's sort of a. I mean, those of us been around the block, we've all made mistakes along the way, right? To learn, you don't get born with like these insights. They come from like trying stuff and saying, well, is like you have to. I have a saying, you have to kind of force the pain early, because that's how you know. That's the only way you know whether at the end of the day, if the thing works, you really got the buy-in. And of course, some of the stuff you have to try. Like they can guess, but like you got to. And again, healthcare, it's not like a lot of other industries where if you get the buy-in from the financial buyer, the user doesn't really get as much of a say. In a lot of other industries, like this is what we're doing. You don't like it, I'll find someone else who will. That's rough. In healthcare, it doesn't really work that way because the clinicians are the producers of the revenue and the widget. They are the factory worker. The clinicians are it's the only industry where the most knowledgeable, highly paid knowledge worker is the factory worker, and therefore the dynamic, this, with the user is so paramount. And then you combine it with the fact that they're all overwhelmed and have no time or patience left anyway, then it's super high hurdle for anything. Again, not all the use cases affect clinicians. There are many other use cases where you have a little bit more leeway with the user population than you do if you have to deal with the clinical folks. But I would even argue on like rev cycle thing, if the thing doesn't fit in the workflow and like your coding quality or your audit goes down, your audit rates go up, like that's not going to last very long with the CFO either.
So true. At the same time, when we talk about users, we don't really do EHR this way, right? We didn't
Yeah.
really go back to a lot of our clinicians and say, let's design the perfect HR system to help your practice. We're like, here is a set of rules. Let's make it happen. Here is a deadline, right? Let's take some of the best of breed things, and here's you need to kind of get them. Over the time, we were able to make it better. Um, and frankly, I've seen so many incredible projects that get stuck in this endless feedback loop from the clinical feedback system where, oh boy, like we're
Oh,
never getting anywhere, right? Because every time you do something, they're like, no, it's also wrong. Let's
right,
try this and that.
right, right. Yeah,
So our colleagues need to be somewhere in between. Here is a constrained set of options. You need to select A, B, C, right? And like no more, because when you practice, like you only see this, right? Like you only design faster horses. So very often you come there and if only I will have this button inside my EHR, and maybe let's make it red, right? And this red button will fulfill my flow sheets, and I'll be happy. I don't really need all of your fancy AI. That's the only things you need. But then you go there, you realize actually no. Like if I
Right.
look on a higher level, I may remove this workflow completely because it's unnecessary,
Yeah.
right? Like automating things around this.
Yeah, let me
So
give you an example, if you don't mind, as I think a good example of this. It's sort of new, state of the art, still early, but and just use an example I'm familiar with, right? So we have this whole multimodal. We have made a huge investment on this idea of a multimodal data platform and AI set of tool and capabilities that people can build use cases, whether it's on the provide care delivery side, life sciences, about using models that are highly tuned for one modality, let's say radiology, digital pathology, genomics, text clinical data, combining them and then layering agents on top to accomplish tasks. Okay. So one of the first use cases that the team built to show the power of the platform, but this is the multidisciplinary tumor board. So any cancer center that does tumor boards spend hours combing through the EHR for the timeline of all of the clinical indicators for the patient. They have to get updated radiology reports and the pathology on the image and the biopsy. They have to look for often NCCN for the latest guidelines on therapeutic pathways for that specific tumor that they probably phenotyped. And they want to go to clinicaltrials.gov to see what the latest trials might be that might be relevant. Takes hours, a lot of specialized talent. So we built a capability using multiple agents, one that plays the role of a radiologist, digital pathologist, rad-onc, clinical research, clinical trials recruitment, and then what we call a timeline agent. And we built an orchestration layer agent that basically pre-builds the tumor board for you. It does all of what I just said. We have examples we can show. It produces a Word document that has the timeline, the image data, the clinical data, the relevant clinical guidelines from NCCN, clinical pathways, and then you can chat with that thing. That's a setup for the multidisciplinary tumor board in a team session or whatever to basically have this pre-work done, and then any human on that tumor board can also ask the agents questions about any of the clinical indicators or other guideline information that the agent produced. We've got that deployed now in about 5 sites, not all academics, that are now deploying, testing, and deploying that against their environments. And we're already starting to see great value. So that's one example where the use case came from the users. And there wasn't one size fits all. So we built a framework that now lets them to customize it. Now, for them, the sites that can use this today have to have developers in site because they have to do some custom coding. It's not a lot, but it's not zero. Okay, so it's geared for the sort of higher, more the part of the market that has those resources. But the goal is, after a number of these get done, can we also do it so it's basically a low-code environment to then broaden it out to the, back to your earlier question, to broaden it out to the wider part of the market. So in that case, the users were heavily involved across the disciplines that do tumor boards, and it's a super high impactful case because these are super complex patients. They have to do tumor boards, and I think, so don't quote me on this exactly, but there are a huge number of cancer patients in the U.S. that there's no multidisciplinary tumor board done for the patient because there's not the expertise and the time. So if you could have a tech-enabled way of facilitating that, how good could that be also, for the patients that may not be going to a tier one, oncology center. So that's just one example of like the type of specific use case, problem statement, and then deploy, and then think about how to deploy that in the real world.
and it's so powerful when you start thinking about it. How many smaller startup would have take to do something like that 5 years ago? Because like if you think about it, like we're talking casually right now, we build a tumor board application that's reviewing your pathology results, reviewing your radiology results, and doing longitudinal EHR analysis out of the box with with additional tools and agents. This is a power of platform. Um, when you talk about use cases like that, it's interesting that this is use case is less about technology and more about, like, frankly, automation of a human role, because you used to have a tumor board coordinator or someone else who will perform these roles for you. What I see in the industry is, like, the more and more the models mature, your large visual models or language models, the more of the use cases and the technology part of this is stop resembling our classic, one point solution EHR things that's allowed to collect the data. It actually starts to more resemble truly persona. Some of the startups even building purposefully those
Yep.
persona-like
Yep.
flows. So where do you think this stuff will go? Because
Yeah.
right now you took a role, you successfully automated it, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the impact. Of course,
Yeah.
the industry wants this to open source, but there is a lot of proprietary things. How do you think it will
Yeah.
develop?
Well, one thing just to clarify, all the stuff I just talked about right now, we open source the whole thing, this current version, just so you know. Okay. So you can you can customize the agents. It runs on Azure. Like it's quite, I know I work for Microsoft, but it's like being a healthcare person, it's impressive. So the, I really think the way we look at things is this idea that, right, AI is there to empower, augment humans so that they can operate effectively at the top of the license. And I don't just mean the clinical folks, I mean everybody. So, and these agents, I know there's a lot of hype in the industry about it, but this idea of a digital colleague or digital coworker is really true. I mean, you've seen this. I mean, every day, the demos you see, and I know demos don't mean products all the time, but just the capabilities you see on what these agents can do, it's amazing. And we're like in inning number one, and the curve, like you said, is like this. So there's no way we could have done that even 18 months ago, even a year ago, because the models weren't even performing. And now you have this agent piece where, there are these standards emerging, model context protocol, A2A, where agents can start talking to each other from different vendors. So we think it's going to really explode. And so the way back to your earlier questions around how do you prioritize use, how do you think about this? To me, again, I'm a solutions person. That's my background. The platforms are enablers for someone to build a solution to solve a problem. That's what platforms are for. As you said earlier, like a platform without a use case, that's not really the objective. The platform is that you can get scale and leverage for multiple use cases off the same infrastructure, platform level. Is if you really understand a problem, you basically break it down in jobs to, I mean, many of us who come from like the product side of the world, jobs to be done. You can basically take any flow in healthcare and do jobs to be done. Now, in some places, there's a wide variation and it's hard to build one. But for sake of argument, the tumor board piece, for example, the steps are relatively consistent that you do. You know what the output is. I need a timeline. I need X, Y, and Z. So you know what the target is. And you say, okay, historically, I had a tumor board coordinator do this. I had the radiologist do this. I had the med-onc do this. So you can map out jobs to be done. And what the agents do is you start to basically program the agents to basically start accomplishing those tasks that work in concert with a human. So in this case, the agents did all the pre-work, but the humans are still doing all the clinical decision-making to decide what to do for the patient, not the agent, for many reasons. Okay? There may be other use cases, and there are, where if I'm trying to do, prepare a claim for a specific health plan, I know what the guidelines are to get the claim paid based on the guidelines from the plan. I know what's in the clinical record. Why can't I have an agent do the matching and say 95% probability this meets the guidelines, everything good, or nope, you didn't follow this protocol, it's probably going to be rejected. Don't just do the protocol because you want to get paid. That's not okay, but should they be in a protocol? That's a clinical decision. So the agent could do all the mapping, highlight the questions to ask, and then someone on the clinical side or rev cycle, depending on what the question is, has to intervene. So given healthcare is incredibly short of people, There's not enough of them in any area, and we can't afford to pay the amount of people we need to take care of the number of patients we have. There are more patients, they're getting sicker. We have a massive access problem. So the way we look at it is, how do you inject through us and our partners on a common platform these agents to start to take away as much of the legwork, grunt work, prep work, whatever you do, so that the humans in the loop can focus on the stuff that they really need to do. And how do you expand access, care, quality without increasing the number of people you have to pay in a linear force, because no care delivery organization can do that. And we know it's just going to get tighter as we have a bigger population that has more chronic diseases. We don't have the money to staff up humans without tech to take care of the population. It's not possible. So I think sort of from a societal point of view, this is the thing I'm cool about, because we all know, like, healthcare, the quality that we deliver is not what we need it to be at scale.
Unfortunately, variability being the problem and seems to be the problem in the care delivery. From the ethical perspective, Peter, because a lot of things are automatable. And again, right now it's maybe your personal opinion, not necessarily Microsoft opinion around that. When we observe humans, right, we learn from feedback, and that's how we create a lot of the agents. Um, where and at what point is this difference between we are helping you to be more efficient versus this is just not a task required for human,
Right.
so the position is eliminated, right? Because
Right.
I know a lot of people who do not feel comfortable with the whole idea of, the AI will come and automate my job.
Yeah. No, it's certainly a legitimate question. The way we feel it and the way we've talked about it is, again, we're very firmly in the belief, this idea of a co-pilot, not an autopilot. And this idea that if you look at all the things we do on a daily basis, there's not enough time. And in healthcare, this, again, as I just mentioned, we're understaffed at scale. So we don't really see the risk of displacing the labor. The issue is that some jobs are going to change with technology. They always do. The guy that drove the horse buggy when the car came out didn't drive the horse buggy, but the job didn't go away. It changed. And because we don't have enough resources in this case to take care of the patients, we don't have enough physicians, we don't have nurses, patients can't get appointments. We have a productivity crisis that we have to drive. And there's a lot of data that shows if we put technology, we can actually increase the economic value that accrues to us. So the part of the challenge is also why Microsoft's spending a ton of dollars in skilling and training. We're not just trying to sell software, is because you have to help teach people how to use the technology to take advantage of it in many ways, because otherwise they may be scared, as opposed to saying, if I'm a call center agent, for example, in a patient access center, I can now handle 3 times as much volume and not do that stuff that drives me nutty, where I have to do 35 clicks to find which physician might have an open slot. What happens if an agent served up for me for this patient with this indication, the 5 cardiologists that are closest to them that have open slots, and I just say, Mr. So-and-so, would you like this one? They say yes, click it, and the thing's done. Like, I think that's how to think about it, in a way that is good for us as a society, but also is good for the individual. If you're not willing to sort of learn about the new technology, I think that could be a challenge, as has been true throughout history.
It's been true through the EHR deployment, right? Like, I know we're talking about AI, and AI is more scary as an example, but a lot of our colleagues, right, who decided not to transition to the EHR systems ended up doing something else that does not require EHR, or retraining. It's interesting, especially because when you look at amount of new job created in FTE, technology is clearly an outlier. Like if you look on the healthcare systems, 20, 30 years ago, we barely had anybody in the CIO office, right? We barely had anyone. Now we're talking about hundreds of people doing things, and that certainly increased the budget and strained the system. So from that perspective, a lot of our technology optimization is also long overdue because it's a very interesting argument of what's an optimal state that we need to normalize with a number of our full-time equivalent employees in the healthcare system. And for some reason, we always take the point with where the most people were employed, which not necessarily the most efficient point. Um, so from that perspective, like, where do you think we should actually find this true north? Like, is it efficiency layer? Is like amount of clinical productivity and the patient experience we're getting it? Is it like some number of a metric from the past we're trying to get? Like, how would you think about this? Because it's not just about the number of people.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think anyone knows for sure yet exactly because we have to get more experience on it. But what we've seen is the following, even just and not just in healthcare, on the IT, just starting very myopically on the IT spend for a minute. I mean, there are a couple of things. One is on the people side, there are a lot of tasks that IT people do. I mean, just the help desk. I mean, I can't tell you how many agents are being deployed to help with help desk HR. A lot of the administrative stuff to free up again time to do this. So I do think that's going to happen both in the clinical areas, sort of the revenue cycle, back office, you name it, is going to happen. I also think that this platform thing is, I mean, you know this. I don't know a health system that's not trying to do application rationalization because they have to. They have, I mean, it's horrifying. I mean, I've never worked for a health system, but when I ask them, how many apps do you have? I mean, hundreds,
How many similar
thousands.
apps or the
Right,
same apps you have?
right, exactly. So, and this comes from a history that, in an area again where there might have been good reasons for that because the clinical teams often made decisions based on what worked for their work. So this idea of standardization without sacrificing the clinical side, I think this is a huge issue. You just can't manage something. I mean, I can't imagine Microsoft having 30 different HR systems, 15 different sales systems, and make up that we couldn't operate. It's impossible, right? So there's that stuff that has to, happen at that level. I also think that, we often get there's often, I don't know if you've experienced this, but it's often very cathartic. It can be quite painful to do zero-based budgeting because everyone gets comfortable with the existing spend.
Mhm.
This was your point. You start at X and you either go up Y% or you get, you must cut X% off. And the question is, what is that current spend actually on? How much value is it driving? And given the new tech stack, not that this is trivial to do, what could it be? And so I often find people just they don't force the organization to do zero based, at least in certain areas. And again, it can be super painful, but it's a cleansing process that needs to happen periodically because every organization that I've ever seen tends to take its current state unless there's a crisis. Sometimes when there's a crisis, a force from the outside comes in and forces a kind of reconstruction of that. And the question is, it's better to do it before that is forced on you and do it on your own and just say, I'm in a crisis or I'm going to be. How do I think about this expense rate? The other piece is having a very clear ROI metric against that. What should what can I live without and what can I not live without? I mean, that's my experience.
It's such a critical problem that we urgently need to rethink. Like I cannot stress that enough. I've been thinking about it because when you try to transform healthcare system, right, and you historically build your whole infrastructure, and I'm not talking about technical infrastructure, your human capital around the whole idea is your promotion is based on the number of people reporting to you, right?
Right.
Your value is based on the size of your budget. And now you give a transformative technology that technically, based on this metric, make you less valuable because you have less people and you need less money to do this. How do we expect our
Yeah.
leaders to do that?
It's a great point. And for me, it's not that hard to grok. Again, I don't mean that in any sort of way like it's obvious. It's just like personally, I grew up so much. It's about the outcomes and the impact you drive. Like that's in my job. That's how I think about things, good or bad. So to me, this same thing. It's not about. It's not a pro. You shouldn't get promoted based on a process metric. A process metric to me includes the size of your budget, how many people you have. The best teams I've ever worked with in software companies are small teams. They run circles around big teams. If they've got good leaders, good talent, they're focused, and they have a common mission, and they're smart, they blow the doors off big teams. Okay? So I've seen, I'm sure you have, examples where we have a team right now in our team that's 12 people, I won't go into who it is, that's leapfrogging teams 10 times bigger than them. Okay? So I would argue that this is a good thing. Maybe painful at times. It's about the impact. And what it also does is it focuses the mind on what are the things that the organization really cares about, the metrics. And then you're going to be judged. It's sort of like value-based care. It's not fee-for-service. It's basically, what are the clinical outcomes you're moving? And I think the great thing about now is with the tech, with the cloud and agentic, you have more ability to actually change the numerator denominator here in ways that you couldn't do before. I mean, like the tumor board examples are perfect. We could say all we want 2 years ago. Wouldn't it be great if we could change the amount of hours applied to doing tumor boards? But there was no way to do that. Now there is. And it's one of 1,000 of these things. So I think by having a view of the zero-based budget thing, what are the metrics, and then who's accountable for driving the metrics? This is often the other problem, right? You have metrics, but there's 7 people accountable, which means there's no one accountable except for like the CEO and like the top level, because that's everything rolls up there. But all the layers below, well, it's one of these things. So I think it's exciting times because I don't think we've had tech that has the ability to leverage the human by taking a bunch of the tasks and automating parts of their job, not all of their job, that sort of the less interesting part of their job, and creating more leverage for each individual. And so I think it's a great time to actually look at it in the way you're saying, Yauheni, because if you actually map out jobs to be done and apply the tech and do pilots against them, you'll see a lot of these things. You can radically change the amount of human labor to accomplish the task. So with a smaller group of people, you can accomplish more, and then you can reallocate those people, because there's no shortage of things to be done that are important, at least on the provider side, that need to be done, including, by the way, increasing the ability to care for more people. It's not just the back office stuff, right? We have an access problem, and we're the richest country on earth. Imagine what it's like in lots of other places. I mean, the access problems are horrendous. So I'm excited about it. I think our technology at Microsoft can play a major role in that. Clearly, there are other folks that contribute to this too, but I think it's a good time for that.
I like the approach around the value because we've been talking about value-based care, right? And uh, making fun of our clinical colleagues who couldn't really fully realize the value of a value-based care and saying, no, no, if only we can bring technology. But now it's actually time to look at ourselves. Value-based IT, value-based operation, value-based things, because now we can do more with less and we can actually find efficiency. And it's actually need to be higher value activities in a self-discovery. Because if we talk about earlier about knowing what you automate and the value, no one would know better than your managers or directors who are doing the task. If they know what level of understanding of a process improvements required for agentic automation, and they're not afraid of moving forward because they will not stop being directors because now they have
Right.
less FTEs or lose their budget. They will be coming forward because they're ultimately solving the problem and they're generating more and more value. And if that's the part that drive them further in their careers and their job satisfaction, then that's going to be happening.
Right. Right. I mean, again, just using again, ambient is such a clear example, right? On average, physicians cut the documentation time roughly in half, 5 to 7 minutes per note. That frees them up cognitively. They have a better work-life balance. They all report much better cognitive scores. They don't want to quit as early. The institution can decide, are the doctors on their own wanting to see more patients? Or are they just doing better? If they've got a capitated population, are they spending more time? So that's that example where it didn't take away the guts of the clinical job. It freed them up to spend time on what they really enjoy doing. I would argue that for most of the other jobs on the provider side, that is also true. I mean, do you really want to take the 100th call of the week about a person who can't set up or log into an app? Do you really want to spend your life doing? Probably not. Does the call center agent want to, the example I use? Probably not. Right. So in a way, the way I think about it is if you had an assistant, if each of us had an assistant, what would we delegate to that assistant so we could do the stuff that really jazzes us up? We all have that. Everybody. That's the way I think of an agent. Not saying that the agent can do all of that necessarily, depending on what it is, but that's the way you should think about it. So if we each had a personal agent that would help us do our tasks, how much better would the day be?
And help us not just to do our task, but actually excel at our task by
Exactly.
ensuring, we're not falling behind with this variability in the knowledge distribution because you're not always as sharp in
Right.
all time of your work, like that. And same are agents and directors and clinicians. Sometimes you just forget that's how human body works. So we're
Yep.
almost at the end, Peter. And one of the traditional realigned healthcare question is if you had a one magic wand to fix one misalignment between healthcare system, patients, society, what it would be?
Oh, well, mine is pretty clear. I hope this doesn't sound too rote, but I would, and this is non-trivial to put it mildly, I would try to fix the incentive alignment problem we have in the U.S. I think it's the primary cause of a lot of things that are broken. I think it's super. This goes back to the metrics thing. If you don't have aligned metrics between those who deliver care and those who pay for care and the patient at some level, it's really hard to optimize the system. And so this is why we have this sort of federated, non-federated world where the system is not designed currently to optimize the value. We know this. I mean, everyone knows this, right? So I don't mean you can solve that on a global basis, but if we could make more progress towards doing that, that would solve a lot of the other problems that have to do. Wouldn't solve everything. Solve a lot of problems of why isn't there more data sharing? Why do we spend millions of dollars arguing about, taking money from one part or the other? I'm not recommending, by the way, a socialized healthcare system. I'm just saying we made some attempt at doing that in over the last decade or so, more than the last decade, and there's been some progress, but it's not enough, and it takes a lot of political will to do this, and people are going to have to adjust to this. This is me speaking now. I'm not speaking on behalf of the company. I'm worried about like what's going to happen in the future when we have more people that are sicker, less people paying into the system, and are we going to be able to take care of the population the way we should be or
At
not?
at the current rate and the current state, no, we need to find a better way to scale and to get more efficiency. Uh, what do you think? You mentioned some of that. Is what do you think may be the biggest unifier driver for this? Is it some data sharing that's allow us to extract knowledge faster from all the verticals, from the payer, clinicians, and the patients? Is it more of a political will, right? Someone needs to truly work on that, or it's like more of a drastic system redesign, and it's a human nature, and there's nothing we can do.
You know, I'm not smart enough to know what it's going to be, and a lot of people are smarter than me trying to figure this out. I'm hopeful that the tech, at some of the tech in the patient's hand, will make a difference because you've seen. I mean, in the next few years, patients, the more and more patients are going to be using this technology to help them navigate and do clinical, help them. But it doesn't solve enough. I'm a little worried that it's going to have to be a crisis of some sort. That's what I'm personally. Again, this is me speaking personally, because I don't know if the system not it can organize itself in a way that does enough of what we need. I hope so, and I thought we're trying to do that we're trying to be good stewards on our side, on the Microsoft side. I know many others who want to do the same thing. I mean, the great thing about healthcare is you have a lot of mission-driven people in the space that want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing, but they need help to do the right thing, and I think that's going to be up on all of us. And at the end of the day, we're as members of society, we're responsible at the end of the day for telling our leaders what we want, and so it's also incumbent on us to be very clear that certain things are acceptable and certain things are not acceptable, even if we don't understand all the details. Again, the hopeful part I want to end on is I do believe the technology gives us leverage now that we didn't. I said this before, but I will reinforce it, leverage now that we did not have before, which is critical to solving this problem because we can't solve it by just throwing bodies at it. So we have to, if we're going to create patient access, the average person the average person sees their provider like 2 or 3 times a year. You and I know there's no way we're going to change health outcomes if you only talk to your doctor 2 or 3 times a year. So if you want systems that talk to patients more consistently, especially ones that have chronic diseases, you have to use technology. There's no way you can fund it with people. So I think optimistically we have the ability now on the technology side with this AI and cloud and agent to really leverage humans to do more. But I think we're going to have to put some economic incentives and alignment behind that to supercharge that, I think.
I think you're right. For the first time, we do have access to the personalized, very clinically aligned systems that's frankly mostly plug and playing into our existing environment, which was never the case before. So hopefully we'll continue to grow in the hockey stick direction and use this opportunity to make everything better. So, Peter, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure having you for the episode.